This is the property subcommittee meeting on August 29, opening up at 6:01 PM to discuss the two conservation restrictions, one from Kestrel Land Trust to the City of Easthampton, and the other from the City of Easthampton to the Kestrel Land Trust. Something like, I don't know, I thought there was multiple pages of documents here, and it's always helpful to have folks here to explain it to us. If there was anything we wanted to, that the members wanted to say prior to opening up for an explanation of where we are, I would open that at this time. I understand we don't have any minutes, but you're working on that. And
yeah, I've got a plan. It's going to happen.
And it's going to happen, promise.
Yeah, it's going to happen next week. I'm on vacation.
And you're on
I'm going to
vacation.
get all the way caught
So thank
up.
you so much, because it is important to have documented any votes.
It is not okay how far behind I am.
Right, okay.
I will be the first to admit that.
Good. All right. That being said, I would call on Jeff to show us any maps that help to explain the two CRs, and also any differences, if there are any, between the CRs, and give us a general introduction. This is for property on East Street, which will help the city and the public to have access to trails along Montauk.
Great, thanks. And may I ask for Mark Walmsley to come up and sit?
I hope.
Is that okay?
Sure, absolutely.
Got plenty of
We're
seats.
generally very informal, unless we have lots of people and we have to maintain a certain order, but
Make sure you were
It's
done
all
your
good.
business officially beforehand.
yes.
Excellent, thank you.
So Mark is the land conservation manager for Kestrel, and has been a really important and integral partner in making the two acquisitions happen. So we owe a lot of credit to Kestrel, and they continue to support the process as we move forward. There is a memo dated August 1st, which kind of goes over it's a very brief history, but going back to October of 2018, the City Council unanimously voted to support the acquisition of the 23 acres in total, and the Community Preservation Act Committee allocated $380,000 towards the acquisition, and the city was awarded a $400,000 park grant, and Kestrel Land Trust was awarded an $85,000 conservation partnership grant. There are some other funds that were included earlier in the preparation for the acquisition by both Kestrel and Subcommittee Conservation Trust. So there's been a very good collaborative process to get here. There was a little bit of a history. We had made various applications, including Kestrel's application for the Conservation Partnership Grant. And so in January, the state, said unfortunately they were not able to award that grant to Kestrel, and that was for $85,000. And so at that period of time, so upon learning of that, and for some period of time after, we were meeting, people were discussing how to fill that potential gap. It was a rather significant gap of $85,000 that was going to be needed to fulfill the total acquisition. So some focus was on how to potentially fill that gap, whether it was fundraising, donations, potentially going back for more CPA funds, which was sort of the least desirable.
Mm-hmm.
And then in early May, the state funding agency came back and said, for whatever reason, some things had changed, maybe a project fell through or something. They said if, I guess the other thing was that, so based on that, we were looking at a closing on the total acquisition for October of this year. So now, it's the end of August. We weren't even going to close until, I guess, September.
Yeah,
But they threw you a curveball.
They threw us a curveball,
Yes, they did.
and it was a good curveball, which they said, so this is early May, they said if the city and Kestrel can close on the properties before June 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year, then they
Yeah.
could actually award Kestrel the $85,000 grant. So
I'm sorry, given my real estate background and history, working real estate since 1983, the thought of getting a project at the end of May and then closing by the end of June, and then just in normal, everyday transactions.
Like a single
Yeah,
family.
single family
Yeah.
house, piece of land somewhere, cash sale, easy to, never mind dealing with agencies. So I congratulate the both of you. I don't know how you accomplished that, but that's,
Yeah, I mean, that's.
I know
like
how amazing
that
that
was where Kestrel really stepped up and put forth a lot of extra effort. What the state graciously has given us some flexibility, and what is before the full city council now is the conservation restrictions. So normally, they would, our trajectory would have been September. We would have been kind of pursuing this path as we were going, but we focused on all the things necessary for the closing, and now we're trying to button up the process of establishing the CRs to fulfill the final requirements for the state. We, Mark and I, brought the draft conservation restrictions to the Conservation Commission, and they reviewed them and signed off on them. Before that, the city attorney had been working with Kestrel's attorney to draft them. So these are drafted documents that have gone back and forth through Kestrel and the city's legal counsel. We brought it to the Conservation Commission, and then the state's conservation restriction reviewer has also officially signed off on them. So now we're at that final stage of bringing it to city council. I think it's escaping me, Mark, as to whether it was the CPA funding attached to this or the park grant funding. There's some mechanism that's causing the process to include the full city council signing off, and that's where we're at, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that actually, that's just a state requirement that the whole city council has to follow. The requirements for the CRs themselves come from two places. So Kestrel's grant, the Conservation Partnership Grant, requires that there be a municipal or state partner to hold the CR. So that's a grant that's restricted to private land trusts or private conservation groups. But again, part of it is its conservation partnership. The partnership aspect is someone else has to hold the CR. From Easthampton's perspective, on your parcel, the fact that CPA funds were used for the acquisition of conservation parcel requires that someone, an outside entity, holds a conservation restriction. So those are the two reasons why CRs have to be swapped out.
And that's really what it is if you look at the map, so the south parcel is the city acquisition, the north parcel is the Kestrel acquisition, and what we are really doing, not to be casual about it, is we're doing a CR swap. So Kestrel will hold the CR on our property, and the city's gonna hold the CR on Kestrel's property, and
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Conservation Commission will be holding the CR on the north parcel there.
Now, there was a potential option for a slightly more elegant solution here, which we did explore, which would be DCR, which runs the Mount Tom State Reservation, holding the conservation restrictions on both of the parcels. They couldn't even wrap their heads around it until July. They told us, in the spring. They said, look, we'd be willing to consider it, and when the new time frame came out, it
Oh
was
my
just
gosh, we
clear,
gotta do
no one's
something.
gonna be waiting for that. So we took the path of least resistance.
Right.
If it were to seem appropriate in the future, would it be possible to take the exchange CRs and turn them over to the DCR at some point in the future? I know this says permanent and forever, in perpetuity, but if the parties agreed, would we have to go to the legislature to get approval, or would it be something that, I don't know, just
No, that's a good
asking the question since you considered it and raised it.
I think it would be possible. I don't think it would require
An act of the
an
legislature.
act of the legislature. The trick is you'd have to get DCR to
To want to do
That
this.
might
And
be
who
harder
knows?
than
Who knows
getting
what-
a vote of the legislature.
Not that we, no, I just was wondering if, since you had brought it up.
Yeah.
And saw that it had some merit, that it wouldn't be necessarily forever excluded.
Yeah,
Because
I mean,
of
if
what
it
we're
made
doing
sense, it
now.
would be
Yeah.
something you could have
Good,
that
that's all.
conversation with
So-
them about. Absolutely.
That was my only purpose of the question.
And I
Please
know-
continue.
Yep, well, I know that you had asked, you had asked for whether there are differences, and I would ask Mark for a more detailed response, but in general, the north property is the property that's acquired with the park funding, and so it's going to be purposed for passive recreation. The CR was written to allow for the creation of a parking area.
Mhm.
Actually, no, so it's the south parcel. Was the
Oh, sorry, yep, south parcel, sorry. But I knew I was gonna do that at some point.
It's okay.
Get mixed up and derail the whole conversation. The south parcel has some different language intended to identify that our goal and our vision is a small parking area,
Right.
accessed off of East Street with
Mhm.
a trailhead, so some kind of signage. And then really the vision is for a handicapped accessible trail to the general area, which is the lookout. This area, it's very raw at the moment. Mark and I have talked quite a bit, and we do want people to understand that the acquisition was a huge accomplishment. To build this out as what the vision is may take several years to
Right.
gather the funding to do that.
Sure.
But the vision would be for a lookout area or some kind of gathering spot where the house used to be. And then, it is written to allow for there to be some types of gatherings or organized events up there. I mean, we wanted to have some flexibility to
On
allow.
the south parcel.
On the south parcel, correct.
I noticed there was talk about possible wedding venues with permission of both parties, it seemed.
Yeah, and
I
I,
have to look over that, but
Yep.
yeah, I might.
Yeah, that's the way I was reading it,
Yeah.
that the city and Castro would agree,
And I think
that
we
it
put
makes
that
it-
in there
and-
too.
and, it sounds like it makes a lot of sense. Who knows in the future if there might be some sort of revenue generating that can help support the process.
Yep.
If that's in mind, because everyone's always looking for funds, and an occasional use like that might help to support
Yeah.
the build out and the maintenance.
I think it could, and I think putting in that as the kind of a reference point is intended to give guidance in the future as to what generally the nature of a potential use would be. And then.
Did you have a format for working that out? Or is that like too far down the road?
In terms of
vision?
working out kind of the,
How, looking at the details for something like that, would that come back to us? Would that go to the?
working out how it would be
Would
leased out, for instance, to someone? Yeah, I think that would be primarily on the city. I think you just have to check in with us, and it could be probably fairly informal,
Because it is city land, right? So
Yeah, well,
it
the
is-
south parcel is-
The south parcel is city-owned property,
Correct.
so we
But
could
you guys
technically
will hold the
do with it,
conservation.
and we'd have to get permission from you. So I think, don't worry about that. I was
Yeah,
just a
I
general.
don't think it'll be a big issue, especially because, again, it is written into the CR as that being the intent of, of the use of the property, so we'd have no reason to withhold consent unless it
Something
was
like
some
that,
sort
yeah.
of wild
Yeah.
event, the
We're gonna do a
5-day wedding
demolition
that,
derby up there or something.
Yeah, no,
And,
exactly. And that's one of the tricks of conservation restrictions, because they are in perpetuity, that you really do want to envision how the property could feasibly be used, how the different owners would be wanting to use it, so you get all those uses in and keep them as flexible as possible.
And it does outline a little bit in here, of an approval process, at least for the relationship between the city and
The
Kestrel.
city and Kestrel, yeah, that was laid out, I
And
saw that.
so,
yeah.
the Parks and Rec Department will be, when this is an active space, the Parks and Rec Department will be the primary city department with responsibility to maintain
Yep,
it.
good.
And they have a
They have
process to
kind of
rent out
processes.
or lease
Yeah,
out their
that makes
facilities.
sense.
So we would obviously wanna put a form together or some guidance on that, but
Yeah.
that will be later in the, later.
And the state's primary concern with kind of having they use their language,
De minimis
commercial
use, yeah,
activity,
yeah, yeah.
is number one, they don't want a private party to come in and basically be making a lot of money on the site. And they also don't want the site being taken offline for general public use for extended periods of time.
Right.
It's a
Yeah.
public property, but again,
That-
the
that
occasional
makes
wedding,
sense.
that happens at parks, all
Yeah.
around, the birthday party,
Yeah.
the retirement party kind of thing,
Right.
Well, typically the park's not closed down for that either.
Yeah, no,
They
no,
just rent out
exactly.
like if you
A
have to
pavilion or a
Right,
portion.
But the fact is, most likely in the south
The
parcel,
parking
the
is
house
not gonna
site.
be tremendous here.
Yeah, I mean, that gathering space is gonna be the main infrastructure besides the trail and the parking area. So it'd probably be like a rental of whatever, if it's a pavilion or a big kind of gathering
Mhm.
spot, hardscape gathering spot with a view.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
so
sounds
yeah.
like a wonderful community use.
Thank you, that's how we were envisioning it.
Do we imagine that Parks and Rec is gonna have to somehow expand their budget in order to accommodate?
As we keep
I mean,
pushing it
that's
off
not,
more and
that's
more.
not, that's, you're right, I mean, it's not a, it doesn't change how I feel about this project, it's just, just being aware that's been expressed by them before.
Yeah, well, we've had conversations about that, and it came to light a little bit when we were discussing an $85,000 gap to acquire, because there had been discussions of fundraising for an endowment for future maintenance.
Mhm.
And now that we have acquired it without tapping any kind of fundraising activity, and I
Mhm.
think that that's been the approach kind of collectively amongst the three parties, the city,
To get it
Kestrel, and
down,
Subcommittee,
right.
is as things take shape, and ideally we get a parking area and trailhead constructed, and when that starts to take shape, so if we come up with designs, that'll be a step in that right direction, and then through that process, once we have designs and we're seeking funding to construct, then we'd probably be having the parallel discussion about fundraising or discussing somehow to figure out an endowment for maintenance.
Mhm.
So that came up with John Mason, and he's very keen on that idea. I'm very aware that is something that we need to explore for sure.
Yeah.
But this is, I think one of the interesting things is that we didn't really have to tap a, kind of community public fundraising
Mhm.
campaign to make this happen yet. We were able to do it solely with, obviously community funds through the CPA, but also state funds and some private donations here and there. So we were planning, up front, if we needed to have a big public phase of the campaign. Now we can save that for the construction of the park and, hopefully endowment's not the right term, but put together some fund.
Bravo.
Yeah. Otherwise, in terms of differences and restrictions, there aren't much. Again, we did leave, as Jeff mentioned, some more space to renovate, that site, the old house site. The nature of the properties are slightly different as well, in the sense that this was Kestrel's property is primarily wooded.
Mhm.
And, this was all open, this was a field, I think there were some remaining old apple trees down there. So we wanted to make sure that this could be opened back up, so we were very kind of clear about that. And then there were just some issues about the two kind of, the two driveways, this is the main kind of entryway. It'd be kind of a maintenance access road, and this was, I guess, I think Old Mountain Road is what it was called, the old driveway going up there. And Kestrel has, we have various easements associated with various properties. We actually have an abutter's driveway on our property down here, which is kind of odd, which we had to grant them an easement before we purchased it. So.
Oh, it's pre-existing to the parcel?
Yeah.
And the easement was never granted previously?
No, it comes up as one of those
Yeah.
issues. We did the survey, we found that the driveway is
Right.
on your land.
Everyone kind of knew about
gosh.
it.
Then we have to find the owner, and then we have to get them to sign the document.
Exactly, you've been through this.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true for the two abutters to the end of the driveway here, the
Mhm.
maintenance drive. They both use that as an entrance to their houses, so we had to get 3 driveway agreements basically out of it. And Kestrel would also ultimately like to, have some sort of agreement with the city. So, I mean, the thought is to put a gate right up here just to prevent people from dumping or going up there.
Mhm.
But, this is really the best way for us to access the property too. If we need to do any maintenance work, which we are, there are some things, some cleanup, some plantings that we'll want to do. Otherwise, the restrictions are generally similar. We try to get them to mirror each other as much as possible, as did the state, kind of held us to that as well. Yeah. Is there anything else?
The two other things that, you mentioned the gate. I've been discussing between John Mason, I started the discussion with John Mason, and he has somewhere in the Nantucket facility an extra metal gate. And so my next task is to talk with DPW and see when we could get a couple of their team members up there to just install it. And get a lock that has key access. The gates are pretty common, but that should probably be happening I would imagine by mid-October, you know, no one would, I mean, there'll be a gate there, and that's to prevent people from accessing up there. And then we are working with Puffer Printing, the sign company here on Union Street, for a sign to acknowledge the funding sources in the state grant. So that's also a requirement. They've given us a little bit of flexibility on, again, the CRs and the sign, but the sign will be something that will go up in the relatively near future. We're having them design it now.
Are you saying also to acknowledge any private donors who would like to be acknowledged, or are we just talking about
I
the
think
state
at this-
and municipal funds?
Yeah, at this point, it's, there's, you know, it's gonna be a fairly straightforward sign, something about the Mount Tom Trail, you know, Mount Tom.
And future site of,
Right.
basically.
Yep.
Yes,
And then it'll be the funding, there's a symbol for,
Yeah.
the state, agency,
Yeah.
the city's symbol, Kestrel symbol, and Wisconsin Conservation Trust
Right.
symbol, so it's.
But nothing for the donors? Is that
Well, the
something that-
individual donors to the project so far, there was only one individual donor, and he's just remained anonymous
Yeah,
anyway.
okay, which is
So,
great. I just didn't know if that was a way of maybe getting some additional corporate donors to
For the
various
construction and
projects.
design phase, yes.
I definitely,
I
I think
that
if you
would-
envision
And
pulling
then-
into a parking area with a trailhead with, and then that could be.
Sponsored
some-
by,
yeah,
or-
yeah.
Yeah, that could easily, yeah. I guess that the two other things that I would mention is two changes that would be coming up pretty quick, in coordination with Jeff. The property, although we have surveys for the property, as you see in the CRs, it hasn't been pinned yet. So we're gonna have Holmberg and Howe go out and pin that. The funds are already been provided from the
Uh-huh.
CPA as part of the overall, so
Those
we're gonna
are
have
nice.
them do all the corners and maybe one or two flag or stake one or two straight lines
Okay.
with the butters. The other thing that, you know, I think the city should think about, and I would imagine there might be grant possibilities here, is, you know, there is a major invasive issue down in here. And I think the thought would be to ultimately clear this lower field out anyway, both for the view and possibly for picnicking, sleds. It would actually make a good sledding hill, people said,
Mhm.
as well, which would be great. But when our stewardship manager went down there, she said that the bittersweet was just out of.
Bittersweet,
Mm.
just we'll take it
It's
over.
the bane of my
Yeah.
existence.
Yeah.
What's
it's
the
really-
capacity for enlisting volunteers in regards to liability to, you know, to help with that?
It's a good question. You know, if it was done, I would want to have them, I would suggest that they be supervised by a professional.
Mm-hmm.
You know, by someone, you know, like get someone like Bay State Forestry out here, like Lincoln Fish, who runs that outfit, and have him kind of, and see if he'd be willing to do that. It's gonna be a big lift, but again, you know, I think looking into state grants for, you know, invasive removal might be worthwhile, because, yeah, I've heard it was one of the thickest, worst thickets we've seen.
Yeah.
You know, my colleague has seen.
Hmm.
So before we let it get any worse, before the trees, you know, it's early, you know, getting into early sectional forest right now, the white pines are coming up and the like. But that's gonna be a management decision, you know,
Yeah.
how does the city wanna manage that? Do you wanna open it back up, or just clean out the invasives, let it go back to forest? It's pretty important for the view shed, I think, so
I think
Yeah.
that type of grant would involve sort of an assessment, you know, inventory or an analysis and then a plan, you know, like maybe it's multiple stages or multiple areas for different activities for that, so that makes a lot of sense. But anyway.
So just know that that's kind of a brewing problem and consideration, but not an unusual one by any stretch.
How do we get out there if we wanted to take a tour of the property?
Well,
Or, I mean, like, I'd love to be.
Well, when I was a kid, we would go up
Yes.
this
Oh,
way.
yes, and that is one of the routes that you certainly can go.
But I
there-
mean,
friends
the
lived on
driveways are
Underwood.
open though?
So this isn't a driveway yet, this is a space between two houses.
Oh.
But still, you can pull in there, and if you want to get the future experience of what it might be like, you can park there and envision a parking area and kind of bushwhack through and imagine where a trail would be and kind of work your way up to here and get the view, and then suddenly the...
But Underwood, there's an access to the,
Yep, you can get in Kestrel's property, kind of right at the end. That's where most people go to access the New England Trail. We actually just did a lot of, we did a big signage project on Mount Tom with DCR, so actually there's a nice sign kind of right here, kind of popping into the NET. You can also take the old driveway up I mean, it is open right now. I would just warn everybody that within 20 feet of pulling in, there is a,
It's a giant pothole, yeah.
there's a giant kind of recessed manhole,
Car
and
eating.
if you hit
Car
it too
eating.
hard,
Yeah.
boy,
Just
yeah.
drive slowly?
Yeah, or just
Okay.
work your way around that. But other than that, you can take right up that road and park up in where the old
Yes.
no parking area was
Yeah.
for the driveway.
Cool.
I could definitely
I've
see
done it
an
several times.
organized trip too.
Sure.
I think if you can imagine the scrambling that has occurred, this is a bit of a sigh of relief at this point, but to button up the CRs, we wanna get the sign up. And then I think in the fall, before it snows, there could be a good opportunity to organize.
Foliage type event,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. It would be good, because I think and Mark and I have talked about this, but early on, we had a little help from DPW, and they brush hogged a little bit, and I think what eludes us right now is if you do take the driveway up, you can get to the vantage point, which is very nice, but we would need, there's a little bit of poison ivy, it would be nice to have a little trail, just even like a lawnmower type path to get, there's a little bit of a slope, and then you get into the woods, and it's clear of underbrush, so then you can start walking through, and if we could just blaze, like, you could walk from the house down,
Kind of the temporary.
yeah, or from the proposed parking area up, it would be great. I'd be interested in organizing something. So in terms of the meeting next week, do you envision having a similar type discussion or overview, or is it something where the subcommittee would summarize it
Well,
and go to the
you
vote?
certainly could summarize it very clearly, I think. I think the sense here is that everything looks good right
Okay.
now, and we'll take our vote, but it's always helpful if you're there.
I mean, people might.
And
be-
Mark, you've been doing great so far, you're on a roll, so if you're around.
I may be able to see.
And I don't,
Say it is, yeah.
if you let us know that your timing, depending on what our schedule is, I would ask the president to give us special dispensation to get you on at a certain time.
Oh,
if
that
possible.
could be great, yeah.
Rather than to have you
What day is
sit
it
for
again?
an hour or two,
Next
whatever.
Wednesday.
For what?
If I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, right? And I
Yeah.
think, I
mean,
can
we
certainly be
certainly can do
available.
we can do our
Yeah.
best. I'm not, if you can't make it, Mark, I think we'll get through this.
Okay, but thank you for the
Yes,
invitation,
yes.
and if I can, I will definitely try, I would like to,
Yeah,
but.
because other counselors will rely on our recommendations, but they have their own
Sure.
questions.
Right.
No,
We're
it
sorry for
makes
the process.
perfect sense.
Just what it is.
At the same time, we voted unanimously to appropriate the funds for this, and I think that this step was always anticipated.
Kind of,
so
this is
I don't
something
see
else.
it being like
Yeah,
that.
It kind of is. I did have another question about non-motorized vehicles in here, non-commercial, and also no motorized vehicles, and one of the restrictions that may be on the north parcel.
It should be on both, and it should exempt the parking areas and
Exempt the parking
roads,
areas.
and it certainly exempts emergency access and maintenance.
Yeah.
That's normally how it
So
works.
that certainly covers that.
You're not taking your four-wheelers.
Yes.
And I'm curious, because people may have questions about that.
right,
And say, geez, is the rest of the park trails under the same restrictions? Not our land, but what this land will access? Or so, I mean, you can't four-wheel, I don't
I
see
bel-
folks
I believe
four-wheeling
so,
on
yeah.
the mountain.
Yeah.
It seems to be a pretty pristine use for hiking,
Mhm.
perhaps horseback riding.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly look into that, but it's very rare that I've seen that the state conservation properties allow for
Right.
use.
Right.
Yeah.
it seems like, if it were allowed, there would be a lot more activity of that nature on the
Yeah,
reservation.
yeah.
I've never seen a motorized vehicle on the reservation.
I haven't either, and I'm presuming
Yeah.
that somewhere there's a restriction for that.
Yeah, and it's usually with any CRs from the state, they usually do not allow ATVs. Snowmobiles are on the edge. Very often, snowmobiles are allowed just because, they're not as impactful, particularly in terms of erosion. But yeah, ATVs and motocross bikes usually not allowed
Yeah.
on it, so.
And it's our
Mountain
sense that-
bikes are on the edge, yeah, I'd have to look into that, I haven't very much, but I think mountain bikes are often allowed, I think we might be,
I know there's some
I've seen
trails.
people mountain biking
Yeah.
in this area.
yes, I wouldn't be surprised if mountain bikes are.
But even that, you gotta be crazy good at biking, 'cause that's
No.
really, really steep.
Well, and it's also more kind of the bootleg trails that are the problems for mountain bikes. You know, if it's a trail designed and it's a specially established trail, it should be able to, you know, maintain mountain bikes when people start building, you know, spur trails on their own, you know, on state property. That's what it is.
The way it ends up reading is linking it to horseback riding and bicycling on trails designated as suitable for such uses.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
think it's
And that's on
it's
these two
trying-
properties.
And that's
Yeah.
what I've
It's
seen
trying to
in
classify
similar
it,
areas.
right.
Yeah, where
Yeah.
it's designated.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they'll have they'll have either a photo explicitly allowing them or a photo
Yeah.
restricting
Right.
them to
Yeah.
that.
And that's for these two properties. You know, I think the other issue that might come up at a full meeting, and I'm so surprised that it doesn't, are kind of, you know, obligations that come with the CRs. And whether anyone might have any questions about that, particularly for enforcement
Mhm.
and monitoring. Monitoring, I can say for municipality, there's no requirement to actively monitor our property. We, just because of our accreditation, are required to do yearly monitoring on any property that we hold a CR on. So we'll be going out and contacting Jeff and letting them know that, you know, we're heading out with official reports. You know, we reference the baseline document and basically any changes from that. So that's on that side. It's pretty safe in terms of enforcement. These are generally considered low risk both by land trusts and municipalities. So you're going to be holding a conservation restriction on a conservation organization's land. We are holding a conservation restriction on a municipality's land, which is already protected by Article 97 of the state constitution as conservation land. So it's really low risk that anything's going to happen. One of the trickier issues sometimes happens with third-party violations. And we have a pretty good section that we've developed over the years on third-party violations, which I think is respectful. Basically, you know, the landowner has the first responsibility to address violations that are occurring on the property from either someone coming on and doing something or abutters doing something on the property. We retain the right, you know, if you don't, to go after that third-party violator ourselves or to coordinate with you to go after the third-party violator. We can go after you to kind of push you to do it, but only in cases where you're not taking reasonable steps to prevent that violation. So I think the best example here often is ATV use. You know, so you have ATVs getting onto the property, so what's reasonable steps? Putting up a gate. Okay, they put up a gate, they're taking reasonable steps. Trying to figure out, if this keeps happening, trying to figure out who's doing it, maybe sending a letter to that person, you know, and it kind of escalating, but it's, you know, we know some problems are chronic. And we didn't want to get when we're having a partnership with someone something like this, we don't want to kind of get locked horns with trying to make something happen when it's a third party doing the violating. As long as people are taking active steps to kind of remedy the situation, we're all kind of good. And also in that section, basically, you know, we can't go after you for our fees if we decide to go after that third-party violator singly. And that kind of goes back both ways. So it's kind of on each of our dimes to go after third-party violators if we want to, unless we decided to join forces together and work together to go after them. So it seemed like the fairest thing.
Yeah.
We actually came up with that at the city of Northampton and have tweaked it a little bit after. But, yeah, so that's kind of, you know, the obligation aspect of it. Again, like I said, generally low risk considering who the owners of the properties are.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I appreciate the education on
No
that
problem,
subject.
no
That's
problem.
good
You
to
never
know.
know when these questions are gonna come up.
Do you have any other questions?
No, I mean, I've
No.
reviewed all of the materials and
Yeah.
I saw all the opinions that were rendered previous to this discussion, so I don't really,
Yep.
you know.
That's actually solved it.
I don't have any further questions. If you have nothing further to add, I'll entertain a motion for Both?
This is the exact language.
Conservation restriction 1 and 2?
I'd like to make, let me just,
This is, before you make the motion, this is a good reminder that Barbara is away this week, and
It's always a scary thing when she's away.
she has previously asked me to, which she has done before, and I've always done, is to put together some language for the motion. So I don't have that
Right.
for you this evening. When you, I may have asked Mark a question, so is it to convey a conservation restriction, or?
To convey and accept, I think those would be the two.
Okay.
So
We
you'd be
can-
conveying to
we can-
Kestrel, you'd be accepting.
Yeah.
from
Right
us.
now, we're just moving that we recommend.
Right, we're making
Full
recommendations
council.
to.
We don't need the
Well, we could
language.
say convey and accept, and if
Yeah.
it needs to be amended.
I think that'll be the
at-
concept
at
next
the,
week. is-
At
yeah.
the next week, Barb will be back.
Yes.
mm-hmm.
And it'll really just be putting the details in front and after the conveyance and acceptance, but I think that's what you're, so we're conveying, the city's conveying the
Conservation restriction, yeah.
yep, and then we're accepting the restriction.
And then vice versa.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, so
Alright.
and that was in the opposite.
We're
Yeah,
conveying a
CR1 is-
restriction
is
on our
Kestrel to us,
parcel, we're
yeah.
receiving the restriction on your parcel.
And then,
Okay,
and then
perfect.
vice versa.
Grantor and grantee.
Grantor and grantee, exactly.
Yeah,
So
so-
you could use that too, you know,
Yeah.
grant and accept, or, yeah. That'd probably be even better.
Oh, I'm sorry, so, so I'd like to make that motion to, I just wanna make sure I get this language correctly.
But we
So-
can, to recommend to the council.
Just to recommend to the council the
That we
adoption.
accept
We accept,
convey-
accept and convey CR1 and CR2 as outlined here in the packet.
That's a good.
Second.
Yeah. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
It's opposed. 3-0. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for getting us through this and for all your hard work. And again,
It's been worth it.
making it
Thank
happen
you.
in that short time frame.
So this is gonna be such
End
an
of May.
Very excited.
To the end of June.
Yeah.
It should be, I could see some good community support behind
Yeah. Mhm.
this.
This is something that will
I'm gonna have to sneak up
always
and
be
start
there
cutting
for the
bittersweet.
community.
What was that?
So I'm gonna have to sneak up there and start cutting down bittersweet. I have to get done with all of the bittersweet on my property first.
I'll entertain, if there's no other further business, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you for your time tonight.